Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY video here aboard good old Athena. Over the last couple of weeks I've spent a fair amount of time building a mold of Athena's old rudder, the rudder that used to sit right here. I started out by fairing the rudder to get rid of the worst of the low spots. I then built a parting board around the rudder and laid up the first half of the mold. After that had cured, I flipped around the rudder and proceeded to lay up the second half of the mold. All in all, I've spent the better part of 2 weeks working on the mold. Why go through all of that work to create the mold? Well, because there was quite a bit of rust oozing out the bottom of the old rudder. Now let me bust out pen and paper and tell you why that's potentially very bad news. I've prepared a little drawing. This is a somewhat sloppy cross-section of the rudder area. The rudder here aboard Athena is skeg hung, so here we've got the skeg, that's this pointy bit here extending down from the hull. To that is secured the rudder, and then inside of the rudder is the rudder stock, that's the red line you see here, that is then in turn connected to the steering pedestal. I suspect the rust we saw here and here on the outside of the rudder comes from the wells that secures these fingers to the rudder stock. Now whether it is actually fingers or if it's a bigger solid plate, that remains to be seen, but there is going to be something that's somehow secured to the rudder stock inside of the rudder that helps the rudder turn. The reason I'm so gung-ho to open up the rudder and inspect this area is because if these wells fail, well then there's nothing to translate the force from the rudder stock into the rudder itself, meaning you could be turning the wheel from now until Judgment Day and nothing would happen because the rudder stock would just be turning freely inside the rudder. I think we can all agree that a rudder failure is pretty high up on the no fun, please I don't ever want to try that list. Do I absolutely know that those wells are bad? No, but I've got a strong suspicion and that's enough for me to start digging, so let's head up to the workshop. Welcome back to the glorious workshop. Now pay no attention to the little vacuum infusion experiment I've got set up here. That is for an upcoming video that you guys should hopefully see in a couple of weeks. Here we've got the rudder. Now let's see if we can get this thing up on the table. Whew, this thing is freakishly heavy. And as you guys will see in a little bit, there's a good reason for that, because this is not foam cord. Mr. Angle Grinder with a diamond cutting disc on here should make short work of opening up the rudder. This is the material the rudder is made out of. It's, from what I've heard, a mixture of polyester and sand. Now surprisingly, this is pretty light. I thought this was going to be heavy. I think the explanation as to why the rudder is so heavy is right here. This plate looks like a solid plate rather than fingers. It is wet in here and there is some corrosion on the rudder stock, but I was expecting this to look a lot worse. I've just checked some of my old footage and there is a fair bit of rust running down the side of the rudder here, and then there's a lot oozing out back here. I was pretty dang sure that was coming from those wells, but now I don't know. Let's just go ahead and check this area back here. I double checked the footage and this area right here is where a lot of the rust was oozing out from. Last winter, when I opened up a section of the rudder, I noticed that there were some cracks in the core material, and I figured that was how the rust was coming from the rudder stock and all the way back to the edge here. But yeah, let's open this up and take a look. It's definitely wet in here, and there's a crack here where water could exit out through the back of the rudder, but that doesn't explain where the rust came from. Well, color me surprised. I was, like I said, expecting it to look a lot worse in there, but I guess the rust that was oozing down there has to have been from the corrosion on the rudder stock. I've cleaned this area up best as I could, and there is definitely some corrosion here. I can feel it with my fingers. It's very rough in here. So I guess this is the source of all of that rust. I've been mulling over my situation since yesterday, and the way I see it, I've got three options right now. I can either A, patch up the holes in the old rudder and pretend like everything is hunky-dory, B, dig out the rudder stock and the plate, treat the corrosion and reuse that in a new rudder, or C, build a brand spanking new rudder. Given the fact that I don't know the true state, so to speak, of the entire rudder stock because I've only opened up these three little holes, I don't think A is a viable option. Add to that the fact that I've already made the mold, which I think is going to be the most labor-intensive part of building a new rudder. Well, I am very much leaning towards B or C. And that means the next logical step is to, well, open up the rudder some more. Well, here we are, the innards of the rudder thusly extracted. There is no doubt about it, the bulk of the weight of the rudder is right here. The rudder stock is around 38 millimeters, and the plate here is around 6 millimeters thick. In comparison, the little over half a rudder that's left here is pretty light. I'm still a little bit perplexed as to the core material here in the old rudder. It seems like it's made up of some kind of white layer and then a sand colored layer, and then there's the fiberglass on top. Here's a piece that's a little bit wet. The contrast is easier to see here. So the white stuff is down here closest to the innards of the rudder, and then there's that sand colored stuff on top. And this does feel like sand, but it's also very light. This piece that fits kind of snugly into my hand weighs in at a whopping 74 grams. No matter what kind of magic this is made out of, I think it's safe to say that this has now reached retirement status. I will put this over here next to the spiffy new mold. Tomorrow I will reach out to my local epoxy pusher and see if I can order the fiberglass, the epoxy and the foam I'll need for the new rudder. Now the big question is, do I reuse this somewhat crusty looking thing? At the very least, I want to price out what a new one would cost me. I suspect it's not going to be super expensive, so I will do that and we'll see where we land. Hi guys, it is Friday afternoon, the weekend is finally here, and that means it's time to get back to some DIY fun. Like I said, I reached out to my local epoxy pusher to get a quote for the materials I'll need for the new rudder. Now unfortunately they are at a boat show right now, so they'll get back to me next week. Before I called them, I measured the laminate thickness of the old rudder, which was 4 millimeters, and I used a bunch of water to figure out the volume of the rudder. Turns out the rudder is a little bit bigger than I thought. There's actually 38 liters worth of volume. I estimate the new rudder is going to run me roughly $1,500 US, provided we do all of the machining on the rudder stock and the welding ourselves. But yeah, I don't think that's too bad, considering that should afford me another 30 years worth of peace of mind. Did I absolutely need to tear apart the old rudder and build a new one? To be honest, I don't know. I am not an expert. There is clearly some rust and corrosion here, and that might be a long time before that becomes a problem, but it's there. Judging by the number of comments I got when I posted a photo of the innards of the old rudder on Facebook, I think a lot of people are going to have an opinion about the state of the old rudder, and that is of course perfectly fine. As always, I look forward to reading the comments, but I also know that if the old rudder had failed, it would have been my butt on the line and Ava's butt, but none of your guys' butts. So yeah, I'm glad about my decision to open up the old rudder, and I look forward to building the new one. Seeing as I won't get the materials I need to start building the new rudder until sometime next week, now would be an excellent time to turn my attention back to the Dodger. There's been a somewhat drastic change of plans when it comes to the frames for the windows, but let's get back to that tomorrow. For now, let's just get back to fairing. I am almost done with the fairing. There are some small little problem areas I'll have to go over one more time. Then there's, for instance, the hole from the old speaker here. I'll have to sand that. And then there are the holes from where the lines used to exit. Before I started building the mold for the rudder, I patched up both of the holes, so all those need now is just a dab of fairing compound. Everything thusly sanded, now it's time to circle all of the little problem areas so I can get some fairing compound on there. I've marked a few handfuls worth of spots that needs just a little bit more TLC. Some of them will need a second coat, I think, but with a little bit of luck, we should or could be ready for primer Sunday. It is almost a full 24 hours later and the fairing compound should now be ready for sanding. But this weekend is really kicking my butt. I wanted to start out the day by setting up another little vacuum infusion experiment for a video I'm going to publish in 2 weeks. But this just really gave me a lot of trouble. I had leaks upon leaks and I ended up not being able to find one of those leaks, so I had to repack everything. Then I had a little explosive decompression, which was super fun, so I had to do a lot of cleanup too. And then my frickin' mic ran out of battery, so I had to re-record a lot of the stuff. Jeebus! As a result of all of that misery, it's frickin' 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I still haven't gotten started sanding. So yeah, I better get started. Cue the time lapse. I am done sanding all of the faired areas. The good news is I haven't found anything that requires any more fairing compound, so it's starting to look a lot like I can apply the first coat of primer tomorrow. Of course, there is the small matter of sanding the rest of the Dodger, but I think that is going to have to wait until tomorrow. It's almost 12 hours since I walked in through the door this morning, so I am due for a break. So Jökull and I are going to go for a long walk and we'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Good morning, guys. It is a beautiful Sunday morning. I woke up this morning feeling refreshed with a hankering for just a little bit more sanding. To be honest, that is not completely accurate. I've had my fill of sanding, but I'm very close to being ready to apply primer. So let's get this done. And just like that, I am done frickin' sanding. Woohoo! Unfortunately, there are a couple of spots that need just a little bit more fairing compound. One is down here, and as you can see, I just completely forgot about this one. There's not a lick of fairing compound on there. And then there is this spot up here, and to be honest, I don't know how I missed this yesterday, but there is definitely a low spot here. Given the fact that this weekend I've been riding the struggle bus something fierce, I would like to end the weekend on a high note. So I'm still going to apply primer. We'll just use that first coat as more of a guide coat. However, before I can do that, there are a few areas where I need to spray some frickin' silicone remover. Yep, it's the devil's caulk. One of the previous owners, in all his wisdom, decided to seal up what I assume is a leak down here along the bottom edge with some silicone. I do think an automatic death sentence for the use of silicone aboard a boat might be a little harsh, but a swift kick to the nads, that seems very reasonable. The bad thing about silicone is the fact that nothing wants to stick to silicone, so once you've used it, you're kind of screwed. Or at least you're stuck doing a ungodly amount of cleanup. There is a very real chance that I'm gonna miss a little dab of silicone somewhere, and that is gonna ruin the paint job. But let's cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, I will just do as good of a job as I possibly can, and while I do that, well, I can fantasize about kicking the moron that applied that to the Dodger right in the nads. This is the stuff I'm using. It's called Multi-Solve. I've never used it before, but on the very first line of its description here, it says it removes silicone. With the Dodger sanded and hopefully all of the silicone removed, next step is just to give it a quick wipe down, and then we should be ready to apply some paint. To wipe down the Dodger, I would rather have used some of the thinner for the paint, but that is aboard Athena, so acetone will have to do. The problem with using acetone is the fact that it evaporates so extremely quickly. Other than that, it is a great solvent. Oh, fiddlesticks. Remember those two areas that need just a little bit more fairing compound? Well, I think this is the third. Looks like there were some little air bubbles in the gel coat. For paint, I'm going to be using the exact same stuff I used for the rest of the boat, so that means Sigma Cover 280 for the primer and Sigma Dur 550 for the top coat. As far as applying the paint, I've gone out and bought a new spray gun and even one of these water separator doodads. But for me to use those here in the workshop, I would have to build some kind of enclosure, and I just don't have the time to do that this weekend. So for the first coat of primer, we're going to be using a good old-fashioned roller. That primer has some pretty nasty solvents in it, so I am going to banish Mr. Snuggles, or Jökull, to the bookkeeping department. Jökull, come here. Come down. Divadicty. And we'll open up the gate too. With the paint mixed up, let's cue yet another time lapse. Ta-da! First coat of primer. Check. I had to close the gate while I was painting because there were a lot of dog hairs getting kicked up, but I think that's dried enough that I can go ahead and open it. There are definitely a couple of areas that needs just a little bit more TLC, but I'll just chuck that up to this weekend being a struggle bus ride like I've rarely had before. That being said, the Dodger does look pretty good, and I'll fix those little mistakes. Also, this weekend hasn't been a complete loss. New jointer / planer, new bandsaw, dust collector doodad, and a brand new bench grinder. Now, none of these tools are my tools, they're actually Cement Boat Guy's tools, but he doesn't seem shy about me using them, so that's pretty awesome. The workshop is actually starting to turn into a real-life workshop, and that opens up a ton of possibilities for next winter, for that brief period of the year where it's too cold for me to work with epoxy. The options here in the workshop are basically endless. Now, having said that, in about a month I am going to shift my focus back to the structural members aboard Athena, but next winter for sure I'll be right back here in the workshop. I think everything is aired out sufficiently, so we can go ahead and let out this little guy. It's getting pretty late in the day and I still have to render and upload this video, so I better stop yammering on and get busy editing. Next weekend, hopefully I can get started on building that new rudder if those materials come in, but we'll see. And yeah, I think that is going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!